Hi, Jennifer LaHaye here with Why Dyslexia is Not a Dirty Word. So I have my friend Jen Scaffidi
Yep.
right over here. So we have met through some multisensory structured language teaching and
Mhm.
some um, colleagues, but Jen brings a different set of skills to the table that many of us don't have. So we're both certified academic language therapists. We've
Right.
done a lot of work and studying the structure of the language, but she is an overachiever and she has now pursued her certifications and a lot of work in the area of math.
Right.
So a lot of us don't know, or a lot of us don't have specialties in math, but there's a lot of need for math. Even if your child might not have any kind of diagnosis with math with dyscalculia, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of kids that still struggle in math, and she's got a lot of great ideas on how math could be instructed to help those kids.
Right.
So we're just going to take a step back, Jen
Okay.
Scaffidi.
All right.
Um, so I wanted to ask you, your background, I understand, is regular education.
Right.
Is
I
that
taught,
right?
yes, I taught third grade for 6 years and sixth grade for 1 year. So I was a regular education teacher and I left when I had my kids.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So then how did you get interested in dyslexia?
I became interested in dyslexia when my youngest child was in first grade and she just was completely hitting the wall in school. And we talked about one of our aha moments of what I
Right.
knew was going on. And at the beginning of first grade, one of the assessments was it was a 100 grid. And they had to write their numbers 1 to 100. And she was fine, 0 to 10, and 11 was fine too. And then once she hit 12, 12 was 21, 13 was 31, and the whole way through,
Mm-hmm.
from that point on, everything was completely backwards. She is a twin,
Mm-hmm.
and she did fine in preschool and fine in kindergarten, but was always just a little bit behind her sister as far as knowing her letters, knowing her numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared with you earlier too. It was just interesting now that we're in this phase and she's in the fifth grade, looking back at her preschool report card, it says it takes her extra time for rote things, but anything higher level, she was so beyond her peers, which I still see it that way. So that was our aha moment. And so I was given the contact name and number of Rebecca Tolson. So I met with her and she assessed her and said that she had all the signs of being dyslexic. And I begged Rebecca to take her on as a client because her schedule was completely full, but she did. And so I felt, okay, I have her in the right place as far as the reading. But at the time, there was nothing out there for the math. So I did a lot of research and internet searches and phone calls and all kinds of things. And that led me to a place in Rockville, Maryland called ASDEC, which is the Atlantic Seaboard Dyslexia Education Center. And the woman in charge of the math program there is Marilyn Zecker, who is nationally known and sort of like the leader in the field. And so after conversations with her, I decided to become part of her certification program. So that program, what that entails is they want you to have a language class, which they offer, but they are willing to accept another language type class that is MSLAC certified. And
So what does a language class mean exactly?
their language class, they call it, I'm looking here to see what their exact title is, Sounds and Syllables or Language Foundation. So it's almost like, I don't want to say a linguistics course, but it's basically diving into everything about our language. Because there are so many things in common between math and reading and language. A lot of times, even though it's math, a deficit could be that the language by the teacher is not explicit enough for the students. So they want you to have some type of knowledge of the language.
The language deficit can manifest itself in the math and what they're
Definitely.
doing with the math.
Right.
Because I know the math, reading the text of story problems, and it can be some of the most complex language
Right.
for students to understand. And I know a lot of our kids would get really upset. Like, I'm a good math student, but then they bomb the reading.
Exactly.
And it's very frustrating for our students.
Right. And it happens a lot of times because they're not even understanding what the problem's even asking.
Right.
So they want you to have some type of base in the language. Then there's Multisensory Math 1, which that covers probably the curriculum of like a kindergartner to 5th or 6th grade.
Okay.
And then Multisensory Math 2 covers, I would say, middle school through high school.
So you get in depth in algebra, and you get in
Yes.
depth in geometry.
Yes,
And
I had to do a lot of reteaching to myself because those were not strengths of mine in high school at
Right.
all. So
right.
I had to reteach myself, and it's interesting, by learning math this way, I kept sitting there thinking, if I would have just learned it this way in high
The
school,
first time,
I would have
right?
been struggling. Right.
Right.
So then from that point on, after you take those classes, we really only have to have the language class and Math 1 done to start the practicum, and it's 100 hours
Okay.
of working with a student, the same practicum students the whole way through. I did not go to Rockville, Maryland. I did everything through Skyping, everything online.
Mm-hmm.
And so twice a month for 10 months, we met through Skype. And then I had to submit 5 videos of my teaching, and they were critiqued and graded and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So that's pretty much the program. So it could take 2 years by the time you're doing those classes, and that's about what it took me. And so now I'm multisensory math certified as well.
Okay, so that's what it's called, multisensory math certified. Do you have
Right.
to take any type of certification test, or is it correlated with I'm sure the practicum has to be part of it, obviously.
The practicum is part of it, and then in Math 1 and Math 2, we did have a final exam in both classes. So
Okay.
that was sort of the testing part of it.
Okay.
And then throughout those classes, we had different projects, journal responses, those types of things. So there wasn't, for it to become a certified academic language therapist, we had to take the test.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't.
This is different.
That test has not been designed yet. I'm sure in the near future there'll probably be something like that, but when I went to the program, that didn't exist.
And so correct me if I'm wrong. So her daughter's in 5th grade now, but when she was in 1st grade, there wasn't anything. So this is a pretty new
Yeah,
idea, and you feel like you're making some strides.
I feel like I'm making huge strides. My daughter went up 20 points on the MAP test.
That's a standardized test that the
in
district
Ohio.
uses to measure growth,
Right.
benchmark.
Right. So I think that just by her being able to do math the way this program teaches it, which I'll go over that in just a second, has really helped her, because she has had to visually see it, not just look at something and memorize it. So basically, there's so many things I could go into, but the method of it is basically the CRA method. So C stands for the concrete. And when we're looking at that, we're looking at hands-on activities, kinesthetic, tactile. We use those things to introduce a concept. Our gross motor skills are
And it
being
doesn't
used.
matter how old the student is?
Oh, not at all.
So if they
Not
can be
at
a
all.
high school student,
Yeah.
right, in algebra?
In
or-
algebra, I've used units of cubes
Multisensory.
and all kinds of things for algebra problems.
So
Yeah.
don't think this is a young child issue,
Right,
because the
it's not a young child
manipulatives
issue.
can be they're more meaningful.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how old the student is or what the topic is.
Right. And so the goal is, even though you're introducing using the manipulatives, the goal is to get rid of them.
To kind of fade them out as
Fade
needed.
them out, right. So we start at the concrete level, and by doing those gross motor skills, that's aiding our memory. And then we move on to the representational level, and that is semi-concrete. You're using pictures, shapes to reinforce what you did at the concrete level. So you're reinforcing that. That also helps with retrieval, and it stores it in the student's portable memory. And then you move on to the abstract level. And that level, you're using numbers to represent the quantities. And it's basically using the numbers. You've seen it, you've done it hands-on, you can represent it by drawing it out, and now you're ready for the numbers. So even though that sounds, real quick, just by practicing that leads you to the numbers, and it's in your memory, and they can hold on to it. So it's worked out really, really well.
Yeah, a lot of our students with dyslexia, they have a hard time with rote type activities, calendars, multiplication, addition,
Multiplication's huge. Right.
Days of the week, months of the year, all those types of things that people will. If you don't have trouble, like, oh yeah, I know what month it is, I know what next month
Right.
is. A lot of times that's really hard for students, and she shared about her daughter, but it can be such great deep thinkers, but you have to make it concrete. They need to understand their multiplication. I'm pointing out multiplication charts.
That's a huge one. I mean,
That's a great
huge.
example.
You see it a lot there.
But they need to understand that they can do 3 times 6, and but it might have to
Right.
start in that concrete way.
Right, so that they can see it and they can understand it. The research out there showing is that there's such a lack of numeracy knowledge. Showing a kid the number 6, they might not even know what that even
What does
is.
that even mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so the research showing there's always a lot of times a weakness in numeracy sense. So just by building it out, looking at it, visually seeing it, touching it, all that, and then being able to represent it too, they hold on to it. So
It's that meaningful connection, I think, is what we're making.
Exactly.
So I wanted to ask you too, Jen. So the type of instruction that you do? Do you call it multisensory math?
I call it multisensory math.
You call it multisensory math. How does that correlate or align to Common Core math? Because most people are working with Common Core math, or they have their curriculum and they have multisensory math. How am I going to make that work in my classroom or with my child? And go ahead.
So I take what the students are doing in class, what the Common Core,
whatever they're learning
it
in
is,
grade they're in.
right? Whatever it is, and then I somehow make it multisensory for them, because they can come to me and learn math, learn addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all that kind of stuff, algebra. But school is their life. That's what they're doing. So they have to be able to, what they do with me, apply it to what they're doing at school. So we're basically right aligned with the Common Core.
So do you try to find out what's going on in the classroom, or do you do like an addition to, like they're in 7th grade, but let's say their multiplication skills are still really bad, which can happen.
Oh, yeah. When I first meet with them, the very first time, I do an overall assessment of just every area you can think of in math, we do a little assessment on. And so I look where the holes and the weaknesses are, and then we work on those, because a lot of times, because of those holes, that's why they're having so many problems in what they're doing at school.
Do you find a lot of holes in foundational skills?
And I think that just goes back to, I think so much is expected at each grade level now. These students are not having enough time to even practice, really.
Yeah.
So they need to be able to practice so that it's automatic.
Process. Takes a little longer for the processing.
Right.
So I think that's a valuable piece of information right there. So, excuse me. So in your practice, when we work with students with dyslexia and reading, we see some common errors that they make.
Right.
So what are some of the common errors you might see in math?
In math, just how in reading we see reversals of letters, we see reversals of numbers all the time. The retrieval piece is huge. Just recalling their facts. That's a ginormous one, especially with multiplication. For some reason, that out of the 4, that's sort of the biggie.
Do you see students have trouble with multi-step problems?
Yeah, so in the reading, how we do coding, we code multi-step problems.
Oh,
with highlighters, underlining, different symbols, so that they look back and follow the steps. Because if you're not following the steps, you're not going to have the right answer.
So what she means is there's certain markings that you can make, whether you said with a highlighter or some kind of symbol that indicates to the student they know exactly what it means, what it represents, and they can go back and say, oh, this is what I did here.
Right.
And it means something to them. It's a meaningful mark or code.
Right.
So they know what that...
Right. And then when we correct together, and if it's wrong, we have them go back and look like, oh, I forgot to do that step. So by coding that, their eyes are going right to
and it's very sequential, probably.
Right,
is how
exactly.
You have...
Right. And it's very explicit. The instruction's very, very explicit, just like how it is in the reading. So, exactly. Yeah.
Great. So, my goodness, we're almost out of time here. Woo, so much good information. So, is there a way that people can contact you, or if they're interested in? You had mentioned, and I'm gonna add some more information on here as well.
Right. Finding me would be through probably the easiest as far as going to a website would be Tulsa Dyslexia Services. I'm on there. And then the ASDEC website that we had talked about, which is www.asdec, which is ASDEC.org. Not .com, .org.
.org.
Yeah.
And so what do you currently are doing right now with your math?
Currently, right now, I have a couple students that I see privately, and then I'm possibly thinking about doing the QI for math, which is a qualified instructor, to actually be a math instructor for the teachers. So hopefully we can get some more of this methodology out there, and it'll help students that are struggling.
Okay. So I'm going to put it out there. I think, are you available for consults and for
Sure.
So parents, if you have any questions, find her on the website, and she will be glad to get back to you.
Get back to them.
She's a double threat, math and reading. All right, Jen Scaffidi, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
And Jen, this is why dyslexia.
It's not a dirty word.
Thanks. Or in this case, dyscalculia.
That's right.
Thank you.